I'm Joe, I'm 32. And if you had told me 5 years ago that my entire family would implode over a single conversation in our childhood kitchen, I would have laughed. My family has always been dramatic, my mom in particular. But what happened that night went beyond drama. It was years of secrets, manipulation, and lies collapsing in one awful, almost cinematic moment. And the worst part? I didn't even see it coming. To explain how it got there, I have to start with what my family used to be, or at least, what I thought we were. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the middle child between my older brother, Daniel, and my younger sister, Chloe. My dad passed away when I was 15, which left Mom in charge of everything. The bills, the house, the three of us. She always reminded us of that, how much she sacrificed for us. At the time, I believed it. She was strict, sure, but I thought that's just how moms were after losing their husbands. What I didn't realize back then was that control had become her way of coping, and her version of love was more like possession. Daniel was her favorite. She never said it out loud, but you could feel it in the air. He could crash her car, and she'd say, "He's just under stress." I could forget to mow the lawn, and it'd be, "You never do anything right." Chloe, the youngest, learned early on that staying quiet kept her out of trouble. She was sweet but nervous, like she was always waiting for something to explode. I used to protect her as much as I could, but as we got older, I moved out, and Mom's grip tightened on whoever was left. By the time I hit 30, I had built a decent life. I worked in IT, rented a nice apartment in Pittsburgh, and only saw my family during holidays. I kept my visits short. Mom had a way of turning every conversation into a guilt trip. If I didn't call for a week, she'd say things like, "I could be dead and you wouldn't even know." Or, "Daniel always finds time for his mother." That last one always hit a nerve. Daniel had taken over Dad's old workshop after college, and Mom practically worshipped him for it. He could do no wrong. I tried to ignore the favoritism, but it got harder when she started involving money. See, Dad left a small inheritance. Nothing crazy, but enough to help each of us start our lives. Mom handled it, until we were responsible. Years later, Daniel somehow got access to his portion early to expand his business, while Chloe and I were told ours was still tied up in savings. Every time I asked about it, Mom brushed it off. "You wouldn't understand, Joe. Investments take time." I didn't push, because honestly, I didn't want to start another fight. Then, about a year ago, Chloe called me out of the blue. She rarely did that unless something was wrong. She sounded nervous, whispering like she was afraid someone might hear. "Joe," she said, "did Mom ever give you your share from Dad's will?" I told her no, and she went quiet for a long time before saying, "I think Daniel got all of it." I didn't want to believe her. Daniel and I didn't always get along, but I didn't think he'd steal from us. Still, Chloe wasn't the type to make things up. She told me she'd seen some old bank papers in Mom's office that mentioned a trust liquidation in Daniel's name. When she asked Mom about it, Mom got defensive, said she was confused and misreading private documents. That was the first real crack in the story I'd believed for years. The next time I visited home, I decided to bring it up. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Daniel was in the garage fixing something on his truck. Mom was at the kitchen table clipping coupons, the same way she always did. I sat across from her and tried to sound calm. "Mom, I wanted to ask you about Dad's inheritance." She froze mid-snip, but didn't look up. "What about it?" she said flatly. I told her what Chloe had seen. Her hands started to shake, but her tone stayed eerily steady. "You two need to stop gossiping about things you don't understand." I pressed again, asking why Daniel got his share, but we didn't. That's when she slammed the scissors down and snapped. "Because Daniel needed it. He's the only one who does anything with his life. You and Chloe just waste your time." That hit harder than I expected. I left not long after, with her voice still ringing in my ears. I didn't talk to her for 2 months after that. But then, around Thanksgiving, Daniel called me. "Mom's planning something," he said, sounding oddly tense. "She wants us all home for Christmas. Says it's important." I almost said no. I wasn't in the mood for one of her guilt-fueled family gatherings. But something in his voice made me pause. Daniel rarely sounded nervous about Mom. When Christmas came, I drove back down, mostly for Chloe's sake. She was still living at home, saving for grad school. When I arrived, Mom was different, too cheerful. She greeted me with this tight smile, almost like she was rehearsing being kind. The whole house smelled like cinnamon candles and roast beef, but under that was this strange tension I couldn't shake. Dinner started off normal enough. Daniel talked about some new deal he was working on. Mom bragged about how proud she was, and Chloe barely spoke. Then, about halfway through, Mom stood up and said she had a surprise. She disappeared into her office and came back holding a box of old papers. "I found something special while cleaning," she said. "Your father's old files." Daniel leaned forward immediately. "What files?" Mom smiled. "Just some things about the estate. I thought it'd be nice to look back." My stomach twisted. Chloe looked pale. I think both of us realized what was about to happen. Mom started pulling out papers, copies of the will, bank statements, all of it. She laid them out like it was some kind of family show and tell. "See here," she said, tapping one of the documents. "Your father wanted what was best for all of you. And that's exactly what I did." Daniel frowned, scanning the papers. His face started to lose color. "Wait," he said, his voice tight. These are from my account." He looked up at her, confused. "You've been hiding this from me all along." That's when I realized he didn't know either. He didn't know she'd manipulated all of us, even him. Before I could say anything, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Mom at the door, standing perfectly still, her face lit by the soft yellow light from the hallway. She was smiling, this strange, almost satisfied smile. Then she said, quietly but clearly, "Well, since you're all here." For a moment, no one said anything. The room was too quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock above the stove. Mom's words hung in the air like smoke. "Since you're all here," what did she mean by that? I looked at Chloe. Her face had gone completely still, eyes darting between Daniel and Mom. Mom stepped further into the room, the papers in her hand like a deck of cards she was about to deal. "I think it's time," she said, her tone almost casual, "that we talk about some truths. You've all been so suspicious lately, sneaking around my office, whispering behind my back." Her gaze landed on Chloe. "You think I don't notice? I notice everything in this house." Chloe's lips parted, but no sound came out. I could tell she was fighting the urge to cry. Daniel looked tense, confused. "Mom," he said carefully, "what exactly are we talking about?" She set the papers down on the table, smoothing them out with her fingers. "Your father's estate, the house, the savings, the things that have apparently become such a fascination for you three. Because you lied to us," I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You told us everything was locked away in savings." Chloe saw the paperwork. "Daniel got his share years ago. You told her she was wrong. So which is it?" Mom's smile faltered just slightly before returning, tighter now. "You think you understand what it's like to manage a household after your husband dies?" she snapped. "You think money just organizes itself? I did what needed to be done. For all of you." "That's not true," Chloe whispered. "You did it for Daniel." Mom turned her head slowly toward her, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Excuse me. You always gave him everything," Chloe said, her voice trembling but steady. "Dad's tools, the workshop, his car, the money, everything. And you told us we weren't responsible enough to handle anything. You made us feel like we were burdens." For a second, I saw something flicker across Mom's face. Guilt. Maybe, but then it hardened again. "That's because you were children," she said. "Daniel had ambition. He carried the family name forward. You two just existed." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Mom, stop. Don't talk to them like that." Her eyes snapped to him, surprised. "Oh, now you're defending them," she said with a bitter laugh. "After everything I've done for you." "What you've done," I said, "was pit us against each other. You made us think we had to earn your approval. You manipulated us." "Don't you dare use that word with me," she hissed. Her hands were shaking now, but not from weakness. This was fury. "I kept this family together while you were off pretending you knew better. I worked, I paid bills, I gave Daniel a chance to succeed. By stealing from us, I interrupted. That did it." She slammed her hand down on the table, so hard the silverware rattled. "Watch your tone, Joseph," she shouted. "You don't understand what I sacrificed." And that's when Daniel said something that made the entire house go silent. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you take the money from Joe and Chloe's shares and use it for me?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes darted to the stack of papers like she was looking for a way out. "It wasn't stealing," she finally said. "It was reallocating. You needed that money for the business. How else were you supposed to build something for this family? Daniel just stared at her. His face was pale, the same expression I remembered from when Dad died. The look of someone realizing their world wasn't what they thought it was. You told me it was from a separate account, he said slowly. You said it was from Dad's life insurance, not the inheritance. Mom didn't deny it. She just pressed her lips together. I could feel the anger rising in me like a tide I couldn't stop. You lied to both of us, I said. You made me think Daniel was selfish, and you made him think he earned it. You've been pulling the strings the whole time. I did what was best for this family, she repeated, voice trembling now, almost hysterical. If I hadn't done what I did, we'd all be out on the street. No, Mom, Chloe said quietly. You just didn't want to lose control. That stopped her. She turned to Chloe, eyes narrowing. Excuse me. Chloe's hands were gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. You say you did everything for us, but you don't even see us as people. You see us as extensions of you. You wanted to keep us dependent, so you'd always be the one in charge. For a long moment, Mom just stared at her. Then she let out a low, bitter laugh. You think you know me, little girl? You think you understand what real responsibility looks like? I understand enough, Chloe said, voice shaking but firm. I understand that you took our future and gave it to someone else. Daniel suddenly pushed his chair back and stood up. That's enough. I'm calling Uncle Ray. He was Dad's lawyer. He'll know how to fix this. Mom's face twisted. You're not calling anyone, she snapped, lunging forward to grab his arm. But Daniel pulled back, glaring at her. Why, Mom, he said. Why lie? You could have told us the truth. We could have worked it out. Her voice cracked. Because I knew you wouldn't understand, she said, her hands trembling. You would have left me like your father did. That sentence hit like a slap. What do you mean? I asked slowly. She froze. Chloe whispered. What do you mean like Dad did? The air in the room seemed to thicken. Mom looked at us, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide whether to speak or not. Finally, she said, your father didn't die in that accident the way you think he did. He left us before that. I felt my stomach drop. What are you talking about? She took a shaky breath. He was going to divorce me, she said quietly. He was tired of holding everything together. He said I was too controlling. Her tone dripped with bitterness. So I told him if he left, he'd lose everything. The house, the workshop, even you three. I wasn't going to let him abandon us. Chloe covered her mouth. Daniel took a step back, eyes wide. Mom, what did you do? She shook her head quickly. Nothing. I didn't do anything. He had that crash a week later, and I lost everything. Everything. The silence that followed was unbearable. I couldn't breathe. My father hadn't just died. He'd been planning to leave. And Mom knew. She'd kept that from us our entire lives. Daniel turned away, his hands shaking. You're unbelievable, he whispered. You lied about Dad. You lied about the money. What else did you lie about? Mom's expression shifted from panic to coldness in an instant. Don't talk to me like that. I did what I had to. Your father was selfish. He didn't care about this family the way I did. He didn't control us, I said, my voice low. That's the difference. Something in her eyes snapped then. She pointed at me, her hand trembling with rage. You think you're so much better than me? You wouldn't last a day in my shoes. You all sit there judging me, but you have no idea what it takes to keep a family together. Together? Daniel shot back. You tore us apart. The argument spiraled from there. Voices overlapping, accusations flying. Years of resentment poured out in minutes. Chloe crying, Daniel shouting, me trying to get through to Mom while she screamed over us. And then, suddenly, she went quiet, completely still, her gaze fixed on Daniel. You're ungrateful, she said softly. All of you are. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. She turned toward the doorway and said, in that same eerie calm voice she'd used before, well, since you're all here, it's time you see what I've been protecting. She walked toward her office, and something about the way she moved, slow, deliberate, like she'd been planning this, made the hair on my arm stand up. Daniel glanced at me. What does that mean? But before I could answer, Mom came back holding a small, locked metal box. She set it down on the table with a dull thud. You wanted the truth? She said. Fine. You'll have it. I didn't know what was in that box, but I knew, deep down, that whatever she was about to show us would change everything. And I was right. I remember the moment I touched that metal box like it was yesterday, even though it's been months. The cold metal pressed against my palm, and my chest tightened with a mix of dread and anger. Mom stood there, smiling that strange, self-satisfied smile, as if she'd orchestrated some grand reveal. Daniel and Chloe were frozen, both staring at her as though she'd grown a second head. I didn't know what was inside the box, but the way she said, "You'll have it," made my skin crawl. I didn't open it right away. I sat back, trying to collect my thoughts while Mom lingered, clearly enjoying the tension she'd built. "Go ahead," she said finally, tilting her head. "See for yourself." Inside were stacks of old bank statements, deeds, and legal documents, all showing how she had moved money around over the years. There were ledgers detailing Daniel's business expenses, which were suspiciously padded with money that had been meant for Chloe and me. And then, at the bottom, a folder labeled Joe and Chloe, restricted with my father's signature and dates from years before. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there were letters from Dad, never sent, expressing disappointment and warning Mom that she shouldn't manipulate us. Joe and Chloe must have their inheritance intact, one note said. They must have the chance to live independently. There was also a ledger with exact amounts taken from my and Chloe's portions, transferred to Daniel's account under the guise of investment in family future. I stared at the papers, my stomach churning. Mom had literally stolen from us to control the family. Daniel looked like he was about to pass out. I didn't know," he muttered. His voice cracked. Chloe just sat silently, tears streaking her cheeks. Mom's smile never wavered. "See? You don't understand what it takes to manage a family. I did what I had to do." I slammed the box shut, shaking with fury. "You didn't manage anything. You destroyed trust. You destroyed us." She shrugged. "I gave you life. Don't thank me, just accept it." That night, I left. I didn't say goodbye to Mom. I barely looked at Daniel and Chloe. I drove through the quiet streets, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I couldn't believe I'd been living under the shadow of her manipulation for so long. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about fairness, about Mom's love, was a lie. I didn't go back to that house for weeks. Chloe called a few times, but she was still living there, trapped in Mom's sphere. Daniel seemed to be avoiding me too, probably processing his own betrayal. I was angry, yes, but beneath the anger was this deep, hollow feeling, like my foundation had been pulled out from under me. I felt alone in a way I hadn't since Dad passed. It was at that lowest point, sitting in my empty apartment with a half-eaten pizza and a stack of unopened bills, that I realized something. I had spent so much of my life reacting to Mom, letting her control how I felt, how I lived, that I had never truly lived for myself. My career was stable but uninspired. My relationships were superficial because I was constantly wary of being manipulated or abandoned. If I stayed in that spiral, Mom would win, no matter what she'd done. So I started small. I got rid of old debts I'd been avoiding, set up new accounts that Mom couldn't access, and began researching investments, not just for money, but for independence. I signed up for online courses to sharpen my IT skills, expanding my freelance work into consulting. It wasn't overnight, but slowly, I began to feel the old spark of self-worth I hadn't realized I'd lost. I also started documenting everything. Every conversation, every suspicious email from Mom, every ledger or paper Daniel had access to. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew one day it would matter. For now, it was just about reclaiming my life. Chloe finally managed to move out a few months later. She got a small apartment near her grad school, and we started talking more openly. For the first time in years, we could discuss Mom without fear. Daniel, meanwhile, struggled with guilt. He admitted he'd suspected something was off with his account, but had trusted Mom blindly. He seemed almost paralyzed by it. During this time, I began to realize the scope of what Mom had done, not just financially, but emotionally. Every argument she'd sparked, every lie she'd told, had been a tool to keep us under her thumb. And now, with Chloe out and Daniel facing reality, her control was slipping. I threw myself into work and personal growth like my life depended on it, because it did. I started seeing opportunities I'd ignored before. I connected with colleagues who became mentors, and my freelance work began generating more than I'd ever earned at my old full-time job. I even started volunteering for a local tech nonprofit, helping underprivileged kids learn coding. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being manipulated, I was finally in control. But the more I succeeded, the more I realized something else. Mom would not go down quietly. I started noticing little things, strange calls, vague emails, coincidental sightings near my office. She was testing me, trying to see if I'd fall back into her orbit. I didn't, but the knowledge that she was still scheming, still watching, made every victory feel incomplete. The tipping point came one evening when I received an unexpected email from Mom, carefully worded, filled with guilt-laced undertones about family, loyalty, and sacrifice. "I only ever wanted what was best for all of you," it said. "I hope you understand someday." I read it twice, then deleted it. Understanding wasn't the issue. I would never understand, because she had chosen manipulation over honesty. But I realized something crucial. If I let her keep thinking she had power, she would never stop. And that's when the seed of revenge took root. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I had spent decades being pushed, controlled, and lied to. Now, I wanted the truth to be acknowledged. I wanted justice, not violence, but justice that would make her realize she couldn't control us anymore. So I began planning quietly. Small steps at first, securing my finances, researching legal avenues, consulting experts who could help me untangle Mom's manipulations. I reached out to an attorney, framing it as a simple inquiry about estate laws and my rights as a beneficiary. I didn't mention Mom's schemes yet. I needed facts, documentation, proof that couldn't be denied. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my personal life. I reconnected with old friends, started dating again, and even traveled a little. Each new experience was like reclaiming a piece of myself Mom had tried to suppress. I was learning not only to survive, but to thrive. I began to see the outlines of the life I could have, independent of her shadow. Chloe and I started meeting regularly to review our family history, our father's intentions, and Mom's manipulations. Daniel joined reluctantly, still grappling with his own guilt. We realized that Mom hadn't just taken money. She had shaped every perception, every interaction, to keep us off balance. It was subtle but brilliant in a horrifying way. One night, while going through old papers, Chloe paused and said something that hit me like a punch. "Joe, she's been preparing for this moment for years. That Christmas dinner? The box? She wanted us to see it all at once, so we'd fight, so we'd fracture, so we'd be easy to control again." I nodded slowly, feeling the cold clarity of truth settle over me. "She's been playing a long game," I said, "and we're only just beginning to understand it." That realization was both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it reminded me that Mom's manipulations were far from over. Empowering because it meant that, for the first time, I could plan a move she wouldn't anticipate. Not out of rage, but with precision. I began envisioning the steps I would take to reclaim what she had stolen, to finally level the playing field. I wasn't the same Joe who had walked into that house that Christmas night. That version had been naive, trusting, and reactive. This Joe was careful, strategic, and patient. I understood now that to defeat Mom, I had to think like her, but better. And so began my quiet rise. Every promotion, every financial maneuver, every bit of personal growth was a step in a larger plan. I kept it invisible, subtle, under the radar. To anyone else, it looked like I was just living my life. To me, every achievement was a piece of the foundation I was building for the moment when Mom's control would finally crumble. But even as I strengthened myself, I knew the moment of reckoning was coming. Mom wouldn't wait forever. She was the kind of person who, when cornered, would strike back with all she had. And I had to be ready. I had hit rock bottom that Christmas night, staring at that metal box and realizing how thoroughly my family had been manipulated. But now, months later, I was rising from the ashes. Stronger, wiser, patient. I had a plan, and every day I took steps to make sure it would succeed. The months that followed my quiet rise were, in many ways, the most intense and exhilarating of my life. I was no longer the reactive, naive Joe who had stormed out of Mom's house that Christmas. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, brick by brick, and now I was ready to start laying the groundwork for the reckoning I knew was coming. But unlike Mom, I wasn't rushing. I had learned from her mistakes, the chaos, the emotion, the brash moves that ultimately left you exposed. This would be precise, calculated, and undeniable. The first step was intelligence. I needed to know everything about Mom's current life, her finances, her network, her habits. Daniel had been useful here, though reluctantly. He'd started asking questions about Mom's investments after our initial fallout, and I quietly guided him toward observing patterns rather than confronting her directly. Chloe helped too. She was living independently now, free from Mom's immediate influence, and she had started noticing little inconsistencies in Mom's stories, small things she had previously shrugged off. Together, the three of us became a quiet investigative team, documenting everything. I began revisiting the metal box from that Christmas night. Each document, ledger, and note became a clue. I traced transfers, looked at old contracts, and even dug into Mom's current financial statements, which I obtained through careful research and discreet legal inquiries. I was methodical. Every phone call she made, every check she wrote, every investment she touted as for the family, I cross-checked it against records. I learned things I hadn't imagined. She had set up multiple trusts, hidden accounts under minor relatives' names, and even invested some of Daniel's money in speculative ventures she personally controlled. If one thing was clear, it was that she had been orchestrating the family's finances like a puppeteer for decades, and she still thought she could do it unnoticed. But I didn't just stop at finances. I needed to understand her psychology, her habits, her triggers, her weaknesses. She had a particular way of responding when she thought someone was doubting her competence, when she felt underappreciated, when her control was challenged. I had seen the reactions firsthand, the tightening jaw, the short, clipped breaths, the sudden intensity in her eyes. I began keeping notes, not to obsess, but to create a map. Understanding how she operated meant I could anticipate her moves, and more importantly, manipulate her perceptions the way she had manipulated ours for so long. Next came allies. I realized quickly that Daniel, for all his guilt, was not entirely useful unless I framed our actions carefully. He was still Mom's favorite and had a hard time fully accepting her deceit, though he had begun questioning it more each day. Chloe, on the other hand, was a perfect ally, observant, meticulous, and cautious. Together, we started compiling all of the evidence: bank statements, emails, letters, contracts, and photographs. Every scrap of proof that could illustrate not just her manipulations, but her deliberate favoritism and outright theft. I also began strengthening my position in ways Mom would never suspect. I expanded my freelance business into a small consultancy, quietly taking clients I knew would generate long-term contracts. I invested in accounts she couldn't touch, set up legal protections for assets, and even discreetly secured a lawyer who specialized in estate law and family disputes, but one I could approach as a hypothetical scenario. Mom would never know that I was preparing for the moment when every document and action would have consequences. Socially, I started planting subtle narratives. I spoke to family friends, longtime neighbors, and even distant relatives about my accomplishments and financial independence. Not bragging, not flaunting, just casually mentioning details that suggested I was thriving outside her influence. Mom had always relied on our perceived dependence to maintain her control. By quietly undermining that narrative, I began to remove one of her key levers, the illusion that she held all the power. The next phase was timing. I had learned from past confrontations with Mom that rushing led to disaster. She thrived on emotion, on immediate reactions, and on chaos. The moment I chose to confront her, or allow others to confront her, had to be perfect. I needed an environment where her pride, her ego, and her carefully cultivated reputation would amplify the impact of her exposure. Something public, something undeniable, something that would leave no room for her to deflect or rewrite the story. It came to me almost naturally. Our family's annual reunion at the lake house, a tradition Mom prided herself on as the glue of the family, was the perfect stage. Everyone would be present: distant relatives, family friends, even some local business contacts who respected Mom publicly. It was a weekend Mom had spent decades perfecting, with meticulous schedules, meals, and orchestrated social dynamics. She would be in her element, confident and commanding. And yet, that confidence made her vulnerable. She would underestimate the precision and planning I had put into this. In the weeks leading up to the reunion, I started setting the pieces in place. I invited a trusted family attorney under the pretense of reviewing some old documents, making sure they were discreetly available if needed. I coordinated with Chloe and Daniel on signals, on cues, and on how to subtly direct conversations without alerting Mom that we were aware of her schemes. We even rehearsed reactions to potential denials, lies, or manipulations, ensuring that we would remain calm, collected, and undeniably factual. Simultaneously, I nurtured a subtle narrative of success that Mom couldn't ignore. I increased my visibility in our small community's business circles, attended events that she frequented, and quietly ensured that my professional accomplishments were visible. She had always relied on the illusion of control. If I could erode her image while she was at her most proud, the impact would be catastrophic. The most difficult part, surprisingly, wasn't the planning or the documentation, it was patience. I wanted to see her crumble immediately, to confront her with the injustice she had wrought, but I had to restrain myself. Every text, every phone call, every casual remark had to be measured. I couldn't afford a single misstep. I kept reminding myself, this wasn't about revenge in the heat of anger. It was about orchestrating a revelation so thorough, so undeniable, that her influence and control would evaporate in front of everyone. One evening, a week before the reunion, I sat in my apartment reviewing the final checklist. Documents were organized chronologically, highlighting every instance of favoritism, every financial misallocation, every lie. I had letters from Dad, ledger sheets, bank statements, and even witness statements from distant relatives who had noticed anomalies over the years. Chloe had organized visual aids, making the evidence easy to understand at a glance. Daniel was on board, though still uneasy. He had begun to fully grasp Mom's manipulations and was ready to support our approach. The adrenaline had begun to build. I wasn't scared, not really. I was exhilarated. After years of being trapped in Mom's orbit, I finally had the upper hand. And yet, a part of me remained cautious. Mom was clever. She had survived countless challenges before, always emerging with control intact. One false move, one miscalculated reveal, and the plan could backfire spectacularly. But I had the patience, the preparation, and the evidence. And most importantly, I had the unity of my siblings, finally aware, finally willing, finally ready. Together, we were no longer vulnerable. We were prepared. On the day of the reunion, I arrived early, carrying a subtle, unassuming briefcase that contained the key documents. Chloe was already there, helping set up the living room in a casual, just another family gathering way. Daniel was pacing quietly, checking and double-checking details. Mom arrived last, radiant and oblivious, wearing her usual air of command. She greeted everyone warmly, unaware of the storm gathering quietly around her. As the evening unfolded, I maintained a calm, friendly demeanor. Conversations were casual, laughter filled the room, and Mom was in her element, sharing stories, directing activities, basking in the illusion of control. I watched her closely, noting how she interacted with everyone, how her pride radiated in her posture and speech. Every observation was fuel for the next step. Then, as planned, the moment approached. A subtle question from a distant cousin about family finances opened the door. Mom started answering confidently, as she always did, weaving her narrative of sacrifice and control. I waited, patiently. Chloe and Daniel knew the signal. And I knew, finally, that the time was almost right. The storm was coming. Mom had built her empire of lies over decades, but the foundation was brittle. And when the first domino fell, there would be no stopping the cascade. I could feel my heart rate quicken, but my hands remained steady. Every piece was in place, every ally aware, every document ready. The control she had clung to for so long was about to slip through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The morning of the reunion, everything felt almost too calm. I arrived at the lake house before anyone else, the early sun reflecting off the water and casting a quiet, deceptive serenity across the property. I carried the briefcase with me like it was a normal piece of luggage, but inside it was the culmination of months of planning. Bank statements, letters from Dad, ledgers, photographs, and every piece of evidence Mom had tried so desperately to hide. This wasn't a moment for emotion, it was a moment for precision. Chloe and Daniel arrived shortly after, both tense but composed. Chloe had set up the living room so it looked casual. Family photos, snacks on the table, candles on the mantel. Everything normal. Mom arrived last, radiant as always, wearing the same air of authority she had cultivated for decades. She greeted everyone warmly, unaware that the entire dynamic of the room had already shifted. The reunion started like any other. Laughter, small talk, anecdotes about past holidays. Mom took the lead in orchestrating activities, moving from conversation to conversation with her practiced charm. I watched her carefully, noting every interaction, every flicker of pride or satisfaction. She had no idea that the evening would not end in her favor. The trigger came quietly. A distant cousin asked, almost casually, "So, how are the family finances looking these days? I remember Dad used to leave you all some savings." Mom's eyes lit up. She leaned forward eagerly, ready to spin her story, to remind everyone how much she had sacrificed and managed for us. This was perfect. I waited, patient, letting her weave her narrative, letting her pride build the walls she was about to crash into. When she finished, smiling at the room, I stood. My hands were calm, my voice steady. "Mom," I said, "I think it's time everyone saw exactly what's been going on." I set the briefcase down and opened it, spreading the documents across the table. The papers were carefully organized. First the letters from Dad, then the ledgers showing her diversion of funds, then the photographs and bank statements tying everything together. The room went quiet, the only sound the gentle lapping of water outside. Mom froze, her smile faltering. "Joe, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling, a crack in her armor I had waited years to see. I looked at her evenly. "This is everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every time you redirected money that belonged to Chloe and me to Daniel's account. Every time you convinced us we were unworthy or incapable. Every letter Dad wrote, warning you not to manipulate us. And now, everyone here can see it too." Chloe stepped forward, pulling out some of her own notes. "We documented everything, Mom. Every time you tried to control us, every financial move you made that was deceptive. The evidence is overwhelming." Daniel, pale and shaking, added, I didn't realize the full extent. I trusted you blindly, Mom. I see now that you've been controlling all of us, not just me." Mom's eyes darted around the room. She had built her empire of lies, but now the foundation was crumbling. She stuttered, trying to regain control. You don't understand. I did all of this to protect the family, to keep us together." I shook my head. "No, Mom. You did it to keep yourself in control. You weren't protecting anyone. You were playing puppet master. And it's done. Your control ends tonight." Her hands shook as she gestured wildly. I sacrificed everything. I worked for this family, and you destroyed it in the process," Chloe said calmly. "Look at us. Do you think we feel grateful? You lied to Dad, you lied to us, and you stole from us. That's not sacrifice, that's manipulation." Mom tried to interject, but I held up a hand. "The evidence speaks for itself. We've double-checked everything. All accounts, all ledgers, all letters. Everyone here can see what you did. You're not a matriarch. You're a manipulator." At that moment, I saw something shift in the room. Family friends and distant relatives had begun to lean in, reading over the documents, whispering among themselves. The murmurs grew, then spread. The web of deceit Mom had spun was laid bare, visible to everyone she thought she had influence over. Her voice grew louder, desperate. "No, you can't prove anything. This isn't fair. I've been the one holding this family together." Daniel finally spoke, his voice firm. "You weren't holding it together, Mom. You were controlling it. And now it's time for you to face the consequences." I picked up the final folder, Dad's letters, and handed it to a family friend who had known him for decades. "Read these. Every word, every warning. See for yourself what she did, what she manipulated, and what she tried to hide from us all." The friend's hands trembled as he read. "Joe, Chloe, Daniel, this is shocking. I had no idea." Mom's face turned a deep, unnatural red. She tried to snatch the folder back, but the friend held it steady. For the first time in decades, she realized she had no control over the room, over us, over the narrative. Then came the most satisfying moment. I calmly addressed the entire room, voice steady, deliberate. "Mom has spent her life manipulating us, controlling every aspect of our family, and hiding her actions behind claims of sacrifice. Tonight, everyone here has seen the truth. She no longer has control. And from this moment forward, we are free from her influence." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Mom's hands fell to her sides. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape route that didn't exist. For years, she had believed herself untouchable. Tonight, that illusion was shattered. Chloe looked at me and nodded. I could see the relief and empowerment on her face. Daniel, still pale, seemed to have aged years and minutes, the weight of his own complicity pressing down on him. But he nodded too. He was ready to step out from under Mom's shadow. Mom finally sank into a chair, slumping as though the very air had been pulled from her lungs. You can't just take everything away from me," she said weakly. I did it for the family." I stepped closer, calm, precise. "No, Mom. You can't manipulate the past. But you can accept responsibility. And from this point forward, the family you tried to control will decide how to move forward without you." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, family members began to acknowledge what had happened. Friends who had respected her, neighbors who had admired her dedication. They all looked at her differently now. The image she had carefully crafted over decades had crumbled in an instant. Mom's eyes welled with tears, but they weren't tears of redemption. They were tears of realization, of power lost, of pride destroyed, of manipulation exposed. I watched her, a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction swelling inside me. Chloe placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded. It was over. Daniel finally spoke, voice quiet but firm. "Mom, I don't know what will happen now, but we're not going to be your puppets anymore. We're done being afraid of you." Mom made a small, defeated sound, almost a whimper, and buried her face in her hands. For the first time, I realized just how completely she had lost. There was no yelling, no pleading, no dramatic reversal. Just silence. Just the acknowledgement that her power was gone. I looked around the room at everyone who had witnessed the revelation. The friends, the relatives, Chloe, Daniel. The atmosphere had shifted. No more fear. No more manipulation. No more lies. We had taken back the narrative, the control, and the dignity that Mom had tried to steal. I closed the briefcase, feeling the weight of all those months of planning settle into a quiet satisfaction. This wasn't about vengeance in the traditional sense. It was about truth, clarity, and finally reclaiming the life and family that had been overshadowed for so long. Mom looked up at me once, her eyes searching, perhaps for a hint of forgiveness, a sign that this could be undone. I shook my head gently. "There's no undoing it," I said, "only moving forward. And from now on, the family moves forward without lies." She slumped back, silent, and for the first time in decades, the room felt free. Not just Chloe and Daniel and me, but everyone who had once been subject to her control. The tension that had hung over the family for years dissipated, replaced with clarity and resolve. I glanced at Chloe and Daniel, and for a moment, I allowed myself a small smile. It had taken patience, strategy, and courage, but the moment had come. The empire of lies was gone, and in its place stood truth, integrity, and freedom. And as I looked at Mom, finally defeated, I realized something profound. Power taken by manipulation is always temporary, and the family that rebuilds itself on honesty and strength, that lasts forever. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of a better life, one we would build on our own terms, untangled from the shadows of her control. The empire of lies had fallen, and we were standing tall in its place. The chapter was closed.